Today, we become legends.
With Worlds concluding and of course the launch of Year 11 Smite, it's time to update the top 3 gods for every role, this time for patch 11.1. We're very early in the season at the moment and the meta is still sort of developing, but these are my current best picks for carrying your ranked games in the new year. First up, the solo laners. My first pick for solo is of course Bellona. We all saw how much pressure this god can bring at the World Championship, and due to several changes in Year 11 like the teleporters, the new beacon effect, no unleashed titans and others, we're in a much more early game pressure heavy meta than we were for basically all of Year 10. Bellona really feasts on pressure with her incredible wave clear, totem secure, buff secure, all that good stuff. We'll get more into this later, but hunters are also really strong at the moment with great builds, and of course Bellona is literally designed to 1v1 hunters in fights, and she does it better than anyone else. You can't go wrong with Bellona right now. Next up is another obvious one. Bake Kujira is now allowed in ranked, and boy has he made a splash. Even with a small nerf going into Year 11, this guy still does way too much damage for how tanky he is, and brings a similar level of lane pressure to Bellona. She's actually one of only a handful of matchups that Bake doesn't completely dominate, mostly due to her disarm and block stacks. Almost any other solo pick has a really hard time matching Bake's pressure, which is sort of the name of the game right now. There's more farm available in the super early game as well with the new Naga camp pre 8 minutes, and Bake does an amazing job at sucking up all that neutral farm in the early game, building a lead and snowballing that into completely dominating team fights. And finally, the third solo laner was a bit harder to choose. There's plenty of strong solos at the moment like Wukong, Achilles, even Kamazots with the lifesteal changes. But we all know how much of an Osiris simp I am, so I'm going to go with him for my third solo pick. This guy just can't stop catching buffs at the moment. I think he's finally reached that top tier status. Again, he's a pressure machine in lane with super strong poke, great clear, good totem pressure, all that good stuff. His late game teamfight isn't super amazing, but he is one of the tankiest boys in existence with his built-in mitigation and damage reduction. He pretty much plays the long game, slowly farming damage from his 1 and 2 plus Sundering Axe procs while never dying in teamfights. Solid solo pick at the moment. Moving on to some mid laners though, first up is a familiar face from the end of last season, that of course being Kukulkan. This guy's damage is damn near unrivaled if he can safely free cast in a fight, and gaining complete slow immunity on the entire duration of his 2 really helps with his safety. Despite not having a dash, this guy is incredibly hard to lock down without chain CCing him, and of course, as we all know, his damage is some of the most insane of any mage in the game. The stacking item changes helped him out a bit as well, since Book of Thoth now stacks a little bit faster than it did previously. There weren't that many sweeping meta changes in the Year 11 update, and Cuckoo is basically just as strong, if not stronger, than he was towards the end of last season. Another returning face is taking my number 2 spot as Thoth remains strong in Year 11. His range is pretty much unparalleled, and of course there's always that absolute one-shot potential from his ult with Staff of Myrddin. He can be a little unsafe, especially if you overuse his dash aggressively, which you will often want to do in order to confirm his 1's damage in fights, but if you play at his effective range and don't overuse the dash, his damage output with how low his 1's cooldown is can be pretty insane. For the final mid, there were quite a few options. Merlin is still great at the moment, Baba Yaga is still solid, Hunter mids are seeing a bit of a rise as well with the removal of the mage class passive and Transcendence gaining flat pen to pressure out the mages, but I'm going to go with a bit of a spicy pick here and choose Janus. He's pretty hard to play optimally, and a bad Janus will do pretty much nothing, but if you know what you're doing on this god, he can completely destroy uncoordinated rank games with this hilariously ridiculous mobility. Global presence in general got a bit nerfed by the addition of teleporters, but Janus ult will always be valuable for those cross-map rotations for the whole team, and even for that cheeky one-shot potential with Myrddin. Again, Janus takes a very specific kind of player, so if you're not well versed on him, I would recommend one of the other mids I've mentioned here, but if you know what you're doing on Janus, he can systematically dismantle ranked games right now. Moving on to the other carry role, the ADC, first up is another returning face from the end of last season, that being Hachiman. This guy has been pretty dominant ever since his buffs towards the end of Year 10. He works great with all the crazy crit builds going around right now, since his 1 adds flat damage to his autos, which is boosted by crit. He's damn near unkillable if he has his ult up due to just being able to dash out of any situation using it. He can play back and poke effectively with his 1, he can get in there effectively with his dash stone and ult. There's pretty much just nothing Hachiman doesn't do well. He's an extremely versatile pick both in terms of playstyle and build, and you really can't go wrong with him at the moment. Anhur is my next pick, pick who was pretty damn strong in the previous meta as well, but really thrives on the pressure meta we're in at the moment. His 1v1 potential is off the charts in the early to mid game laning phase, with some of the highest burst damage and kill potential of any ADC at the moment. With more early gold furies, more neutral farm to contest, the opportunity to teleport, all that good stuff, Anhur really uses that pressure he generates in the laning phase to snowball the game once he gets a small lead. His safety is a little bit lacking in the late game, as once his jump is burned, he's a bit of a sitting duck, but other than that, Anhur is an extremely solid ADC at the moment. The final ADC pick was a bit harder to choose between Chernobog and Rama. Cherno is still incredibly solid as he was towards the end of last season, but the teleporters do make his global presence a little less valuable, and that's the main reason you're picking Cherno in the first place. So I think for the official spot for the list, I'll go with Rama, who despite being a slightly more late game ADC, handles pressure really well in the first few levels, due to his clear with astral arrows being able to match or usually exceed most other ADCs early on. He works great with crit and with kin shred, so you can adapt your build to whatever's needed in the current match really effectively. And of course, he has one of the strongest steroids in the game and can utilize that in the late game to completely shred anything in sight. Moving on to the jungle role next, where my first pick is probably one a lot of you are familiar with if you've been spamming ranked, and that is Thanatos. This guy has basically been dominating ranked for months at this point, even towards the end of last season, and while he isn't seen as much in the Pro League, that no longer exists, and in terms of uncoordinated rank domination, Thanatos is one of the quickest and easiest ways to snowball the game out of control and get free wins. He nukes squishies with Scythe and AA cancels, he can even deal with tanks reasonably effectively due to his execute, and really doesn't fall off late game anywhere near as much as he used to. Given how much power is available in the game right now, and the fact that his AA cancels still scale at 100% as they always have. Even when Death Scythe damage starts to fall off, those AA cancels are still delivering several hundreds of percent of your physical power in the late game, which usually is enough to burst down anyone. The meta is also a little bit more snowbally and early game focused than it was at the end of last season, which boosts Thana even more. Sticking with the semi-global theme, Thor remains a super strong pick for hard carrying ranked right now. Just like Thana, even in the late game, his AA cancels deliver an extra 300 to 400% of your power in his combo, which with how much raw power is available in the game right now, especially with Transcendence being so good, Thor's damage really never falls off. He pretty much asks you if you have beads, and if you don't, you die at any stage of the game. He can also do this hilarious mid gank that probably isn't too practical, but is super funny to pull off. You just literally show up out of thin air in mid if you time this right. The only issue is your main damage source in the hammer is down at that point, so it is more of a meme, but still funny to use. The final jungler was once again extremely hard to choose. There's an absolute metric ton of really good junglers in the meta right now, such as Susano, Maman, Alquang as the resident ranked pub stomper, even Mercury who uses the broken crit builds really well right now. Awilix and Raven are also insanely strong too. There's a lot of junglers you could choose for this spot, and you can't go wrong with any of the ones I just listed. Overall though, I think I'll go with Alquang, as he's proven himself time and time again as the ultimate ranked pub stomper regardless of meta. The relic changes did nerf his ult ever so slightly, as rank 2 beads comes online very early for squishies now, where they previously would have finished their entire build before getting that reduced cooldown on beads, but you'll always find opportunities to execute with Alquang. Tanks are very rarely buying beads right now with how strong support relics are like Emblem, and with solo laners very often going TP Blink, so farming the tanks with your ult is stronger than ever. But of course, if you find a squishy without beads, they're pretty much free food for you given how quickly Alquang can put squishies into execute range with his ridiculous damage output. Lifesteal also got buffed against gods, which gives him a crucial extra second or two to get his damage off in fights before ulting or disengaging. Alquang remains a super strong jungler for just hyper farming random ranked lobbies, but as I mentioned, it's not exactly hard to find an OP jungler in this meta, and there are plenty of others that could have taken this spot from him if you're better at playing them. And finally, last but not least, we have the support role. First up is a returning face, as Athena is still pretty dominant at the moment. She's fallen off a tiny bit since last season, in part due to the teleporters nerfing her global presence slightly. Squishies having beads more often also hurts her a bit since she only really has one hard CC, and if that gets beads, she's kind of useless for a bit. That said, Athena is still Athena, and she remains a top tier support in year 11. Ares is next up, who really benefited from pressure being more valuable in this meta. His level 1 buff clear is excellent, which allows you to rush to lane ahead of the enemy duo for the most part, and start your pressure from wave 1. This allows you to secure the additional neutral farm that's now available with the Naga camp and gold buff both spawning at the same time. It's very risky to contest these camps into an Ares due to his insane lockdown and massive damage output in the early game that will often even eclipse his ADC. Despite being buffed quite a while ago, people still don't seem to be ready for Ares damage, and he can really start the snowball going early with this pick. Switching gears a little bit though, my final support pick for the video is a more defensive one, that being Geb. He doesn't really bring the same level of pressure that an Ares would, or even an Athena would, but his defensive game is pretty much unrivaled and he's a bit of an anti-meta pick at the moment. He does really well into a lot of the top divers like Thor and Aokwang from jungle, where his shield cleanse completely shuts down their game plan. Plus, his built-in crit resistance is really handy in a meta infested with the new Deathbringer glyph. If you're looking for a more defensive choice in the support role, Geb is your boy right now. I will also give quick mentions to Ganesha, Sobek and Kuzenbo too though, since all three of those are doing great right now and were all considered for a spot on the list, but just didn't quite make it. But that's my top 3 gods for every role in patch 11.1, plus a few honorable mentions. What picks have you personally been dominating with in the new season? Let me know down below and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.